A lone cottage perched on the edge of the shingled beach, nearly hidden behind a row of wind-scarred pines that bowed and groaned under the ceaseless wind. For as long as I could recall, the villagers had avoided setting foot on this part of the rocky peninsula, where the sea's constant roar mixed with legends of a lighthouse long out of use. And yet, at unpredictable intervals, an eerie shimmer would blaze from beyond the pines. As though the old tower were still active, rumors spoke of a voice in the wind, beckoning lost travelers to the cliffside trail that wound down to the water's edge. Some swore they had seen figures drifting around the light, their feet never seeming to fully touch the ground. I arrived late one afternoon, my car skidding along a muddy path as I made my way toward the cottage. It belonged to a distant relative who had invited me to stay while I conducted research on maritime legend. I hadn't traveled that far to chase half-forgotten ghost stories, but a peculiar combination of curiosity and the need to get away from the city had compelled me to accept the offer. A sense of unsettling calm weighed upon the place. Each gust of wind that rattled the old fence set my nerves on edge, meddling with my conviction that I was simply dealing with local folklore. Despite the thick drizzle cloaking everything in a gray veil, I caught glimpses of the looming lighthouse out on its rocky promontory. Its walls seemed scorched black by centuries of relentless storms. While the cottage was within a fair distance of the shore, the shrieking gulls and the tang of salt hung so heavily on the air that it felt as though I were standing directly on the beach. As evening began its descent, the sea looked like some ancient, swirling cauldron, illuminated by smoldering embers in the clouds overhead. Even from that first night, I sensed a presence of something beyond comprehension, lurking in the corners of the wind. On my first morning, I took a stroll toward the pines. They stood in silent vigil, gnarled but resolute, as though having sprung up to guard the old structure beyond. Threads of mist clung to their branches, transforming them into shapes that seemed half human, half timber. With every step, the scent of brine thickened, and I could not shake the impression that something was alive beneath the ground, breathing just softly enough to be missed, but not so faint as to be dismissed. A few large rocks then marked the boundary of the cliffs, and I peered over their edges to see white foam frothing steadily against the sharp stones below. It was dusk when I decided, against better judgment, to walk further up to the lighthouse's circular structure. I wore a thick raincoat, but the sea wind tore at it until my body felt numb with the cold. When I finally stood at the base, I became aware of just how tall it was. A narrow tower that ascended into the gloom of the sky, like some pillar of an otherworldly realm fallen to earth. The blackened stones gave the impression of centuries of wear, their surfaces carved by wind and water into grotesque shapes. I noticed what looked like bleached seashells embedded in the mortar, as if the tower had grown from the water itself. Leaning closer, I discovered the heavy wooden door was slightly ajar, shifting gently on rusted hinges. The sense of being watched seized me. Hastily, I glanced around, but found no one. The crashing of the waves below and the persistent howling of the wind made it easy to imagine voices drifting across the air. I told myself it was a figment of imagination, yet the uneasy prickle in my skin insisted that something had noticed my arrival, had perhaps been expecting it. The air smelled of damp stone, seaweed decay, and a faint scent of smoke, like a lamp that had just been extinguished. The darkness beyond that threshold swallowed the weak twilight. I fumbled for my flashlight, casting its beam across the first level of the lighthouse, a circular chamber with a stone floor covered in algae and sand. Water dripped from the walls, and footprints in the sand traced erratic paths, their outlines fuzzy and odd. They were not distinct shoe prints, nor did they resemble bare feet. Instead, they formed meandering shapes like partial impressions of something that came in from the sea and had paced in circles. My breath grew shallow as I stepped carefully around them, feeling disoriented at the half-formed images in my mind, the possibility of something that was neither fish nor human. A staircase curved upward along the wall, made of the same worn stone. Its banister had long since rotted away, leaving only holes where supports once. With no real plan, but unable to resist my curiosity, I ascended. Every step was accompanied by the echo of my heartbeat, magnified by the emptiness of the tower. The swirling wind outside was replaced by a strange hush within, as though the stones refused to let the wind's voice pass. Instead, a new sound intruded, a distant hum, rising and falling like some ragged breath. It was impossible to imagine it could be a draft through a crack in the wall, for it carried an unnerving resonance that made the inside of my ears vibrate. I reached the second level, which contained a kind of storage room. The walls were lined with broken crates, rotted ropes, and glass shards from ancient lanterns. Old maritime paraphernalia lay scattered across the floor, half-disintegrated logs, coils of wire, and corroded machinery for a lamp that no longer existed. I noted a single bench propped against the wall, its wood blackened and cracked. A feeling of overwhelming sadness washed over me here. It was not the sadness of a single person, but a sense of communal despair, as though many had taken refuge in this space and left behind their grief. The hum continued, faint but persistent, compelling me to keep climbing. With no small measure of trepidation, I ascended the final flight of stairs. The railing ended abruptly where wood had splintered away. I found myself stepping across broken pieces of steps, each exhalation releasing a swirl of dust. Above, there was a circular walkway. A broken lens scattered across the floor, the shattered glass glinting even in the dimness. And in the center of it all stood a twisted iron frame, once devoted to housing the lamp. In that suffocating silence, I felt assured that no light could possibly emanate from this ruin. And yet, late at night, from the cottage, I had seen a beam shining across the shoreline. At the windowless gaps looking out at the sea, strong gusts snaked inside, bringing whispers with them. I couldn't discern actual words, but each swirl of sea-scented air carried a sense of urgency. Curious and anxiously aware that I might be on the brink of something best left alone, I leaned over the rust-eaten railing to look down the center of the tower. My flashlight illuminated the swirling dust below. My eyes wandered across the broken stones, the precarious steps, and that circle of sand. Then I saw a movement, so quick I nearly dismissed it. It slithered from the chamber down into the darkness I had not explored, perhaps a gap in the tower leading underground, or a fractured pathway that had crumbled long ago. My heart hammered in my chest, despite the fear, and the persistent rational voice in my head urging me to leave. I was tempted to descend and search for that shape. Instead, I forced myself to retreat. I had the presence of mind to realize how unprepared I was to confront anything in that decrepit labyrinth. My limbs trembled with every step I took, but I managed to exit the lighthouse and secure its door. A gesture that felt more symbolic than practical, given the door's rotted condition. That night, from my small desk in the cottage, I tried to organize my notes. I wanted a clear vantage of the tower from the window, but the wind had whipped up a spattering of rain that soon plastered the glass. Concentrating on my writing proved difficult. My thoughts oscillated between the footprints in the tower's lower chamber and that unholy glow I was certain I had seen before. It had vanished since my visit, leaving the sky black and empty above the sea. When I closed my eyes, I bore witness to a disquieting vision, a flickering light from the top floor, the walls illuminated to reveal shapes flitting across them, eeling in and out of sight. Occasionally I would open my eyes, half expecting to discover the reflection of a beacon in the window. In the small hours, some compelling force pulled me from my half-sleep. The world was almost silent, the wind reduced to a susurrus that tiptoed along the walls. At first, I suspected the motion might be a dream or the settling bones of the house, but I detected a gentle tug inside my ears, as though the air itself were calling. My limbs moved on their own accord. I found myself stumbling outside, the cold air biting into me so sharply I gasped. Despite the darkness, I glimpsed it. A pale phosphorescence swirling at the lighthouse's apex, like the flickering of a morbid star. The ground seemed to slope beneath my feet, guiding me blindly toward the cliffside path. The door to the lighthouse, though I knew I had secured it, stood wide open again. I followed that glow, so faint yet irresistible, into the structure's bowels. The interior had changed since my visit just hours before. A deeper gloom layered every stone, and the air teemed with a suffocating sense of proximity, as if dozens of unseen figures halted the moment I stepped inside. Every hair on my body stood on end. I reached for my flashlight, switched it on, but no light could penetrate more than a few feet in front of me, as though the darkness had thickened into a veil. And then it began. A low moan that resonated up from somewhere beneath the floor. Subterranean chambers, rumors had said. Some local seafarers had once whispered about catacombs under the lighthouse, channels carved by monstrous tides that rose from an alien realm. My every rational sense warned me not to descend, yet the pulling in my chest would not subside. Step by trembling step, I made my way down a spiral staircase I had somehow overlooked before, hidden behind a partial collapse in the wall. Sand and water soaked my shoes, leaving them squeaking as I continued. That low moan turned into a chorus of hushed voices. They seemed to mutter over one another, stifled and urgent. My heart leaped into my throat when I realized I could almost make out a word. "Come," the voices hissed. Or perhaps they said, "Gone." The hush of the subterranean space made it impossible to tell. The stone corridor was cramped, forcing me to crouch, and though my subconscious screamed of the impossibility of such a place, I pressed onward, unable to stop. At times I heard a watery drip echoing in the dark, and the sudden slither of something over stone. My flashlight beam flickered, revealing glimpses of shapes that vanished as soon as I focused on them. At length, I emerged into a cavern lit by that unearthly pallor. The light pervaded the air, emanating from nowhere and everywhere at once, flickering as if water's surface cast dancing reflections up the walls. I realized that the floor was awash with a shallow pool, salt water, or so I presumed, though it had a strange, brackish smell. Inside this chamber were upright shapes that, for a heartbeat, I thought were pillars. Then I blinked and recognized them as sculptures of men and women, assembled in a circle. Their carved faces were tormented, their mouths open, as though forever gasping. Waves lapped at their stone ankles. Above them hung an irregular arch of rock, dripping with stalactites. The ephemeral glow lent their wet surfaces a sheen that resembled cold flesh. I did not know who had carved these figures or why, but a dreadful chill penetrated my core. Desperate to avoid looking at them, I glanced at the center of the chamber. An ancient pedestal rose there, clinging to the stone floor like the trunk of a malformed tree. Upon it sat a battered lantern that resembled those I had seen in the lighthouse's upper levels. Its glass was tinted a sickly green. With each surge of that phantom light, the lantern flickered, as though channeling a veil of power from the sea. Something about it both lured and repulsed me. I yearned to approach it, convinced that if I could just extinguish or remove it, the torment would abate and normalcy might return. Terror weighed on me, but I advanced, my feet dissolving the reflection of the statues in the water. Before I reached the pedestal, however, the air shifted, and from the water's surface emerged a shape. At first I believed it a trick of the light, but soon it became clear that a figure stood there, draped in pale seaweed and shifting rags. Its face was a mask of shadows, with twin gleams where eyes should be. It raised a hand, pointed toward the lantern, and let out a soft moan that reverberated in the chamber with agonizing sorrow. The voices in the gloom intensified, blending into a single anguished cry that made my spine twist in fear. Something cold brushed my shoulder, causing me to stagger. Feeling as though I had drifted into a nightmare, I reached the pedestal. My heart pounded in my ears, louder than the swirling hum. My shaking fingers closed around the lantern's handle. The glass seemed to pulse at my touch. Instantly, the atmosphere changed. The wind of the external world whistled through the corridor, charging down into the cavern like a living thing. The statues rattled in their watery basin, and the figure before me swayed as though battered by violent waves. I tried to lift the lantern, but it felt impossibly heavy. Each fraction of movement I managed caused my limbs to ache, as though weighed down by centuries of sorrow. A hiss escaped the figure's mouth, a sound of primal despair. Its outline began to ripple with an odd luminescence. Then, with a sudden burst of will, I yanked the lantern. The swirling hume rose to a deafening roar, and the water at the floor churned. A wave crashed against the ring of statues, toppling them as if they had been waiting for that final push. The figure dissolved into a mist, but its cry lingered in the air, filling my consciousness with regret and unspeakable loneliness. I realized at that moment that this presence, and possibly many more, had been trapped in this unholy sanctuary, anchored by the lantern's existence. Storming back through the subterranean corridor, I clutched the lantern, not caring that the shallow water now rose to my knees. It was as though the sea were pouring into the corridors, filling every gap. The walls trembled and pieces of ceiling collapsed in a rain of rubble. My flashlight flickered and died, but the lantern continued to emit that sickly glow. I splashed on, half blind, guided by the storm outside, the howling wind behind the walls of stone. At last I practically fell onto the base of the spiral staircase that led back into the lighthouse's main chamber. My clothes were soaked, and my lungs felt pierced by icy shards with every breath. But nothing mattered except escaping. The moment my foot touched the main floor, the door, which had stood wide open, slammed shut with thunderous force. The darkness expanded again, seeming eager to crush the frail light in my grip. I heard the voices from the cavern, that chaotic chorus echoing up the staircase, and I knew I had to leave before the tower claimed me. Yet each step I took across that sandy floor felt weighted by invisible hands clinging to my ankles. The door wouldn't budge when I pushed. Desperate, I hurled my shoulder against it, hearing the wood crack. I could almost see translucent forms swirling at the edges of the lantern's glow, bobbing in and out of view like ripples on a murky surface. Their whispering reached a fever pitch, layering atop the crash of the waves on the cliffs outside. Summoning what little strength I had left, I threw my entire weight onto the door. The rusted hinges gave, sending me sprawling onto the rocky ground outside. Cold night air slapped me in the face, and I scrambled to my feet. The lantern still clasped in my right hand, its handle jammed painfully into my palm. The wind roared off the sea, unleashing a spattering of intense rain that nearly blinded me. But I saw a faint glow at the top of the lighthouse, flickering in violent contortions as though the tower itself was convulsing. Against the elements and my terror, I stumbled away from that accursed structure, half crawling, half running, until I reached the cusp of the pines. Their branches hissed above me, and the thunderous crash of the nearby waves rumbled in my bones. At last, I made it to the cottage. The front door slammed behind me, and I fumbled for the lamp in the corner, turning soft light upon the small entryway. Collapsing into a chair, I stared down at the battered lantern that had cost me so dearly to retrieve. Even in the gentle glow, I could discern that faint phosphorescence pulsating within its glass. As dawn broke, I mustered the courage to step outside again. The lighthouse stood motionless, draped in morning's haze, silent and inscrutable. Yet I did not dare venture near it. Resting on the moss-stained porch, I gazed across the wild sea. My mind churned with questions about what I had liberated or perhaps released by taking the lantern. Part of me dreaded that I had moved the curse upon myself. Another part insisted that I had done what the restless spirits could not do on their own. I recalled that miserable shape that beckoned me, that pointed me toward the lantern. Indeed, that sorrow had not felt malicious, rather a desperate plea for deliverance. But the presence of the lantern is inescapable. Its alien glow persists despite my attempts to extinguish it. Endless attempts to pry open its casing or crack its supernatural glass have failed. The voices I heard below the lighthouse now haunt my dreams, begging me to free them entirely. I fear the tower's presence still lingers within this relic. Even though I have locked it in an old trunk, I catch glimpses of green light flickering beneath the lid. Each time I close my eyes, I hear the ocean's roar. In my fitful sleep, I see that monstrous cavern once more, with the ring of petrified figures crying out for release. I see that spectral shape, standing half-submerged in brine, unveiling its empty eye. The locals, if pressed, speak in hushed tones of the phenomena out by the cliffs. They say travelers vanish near the pine dunes, lured by the promise of light in the storm. Some claim they hear the tower's horn, even though the battered machinery for it was destroyed decades ago. I recall my own descent, how easy it was to forget my surroundings the moment I stepped into that realm of gloom and sea-scented sorrow. The lines between past and present, life and death, twisted and nearly snapped. Those who dare approach that region of the coast sense a corruption in the wind, a beckoning that challenges reason. Now, as I pen these lines from my lonesome refuge, the sea rages beyond the window. Storm clouds loom, bruising the horizon. Every so often I spy a faint shimmer at the edge of vision. My heart lurches, imagining that cursed tower lighting up again. Perhaps it calls not only those outside, but those within hearing distance of these words. The lure of that unearthly glow promises some secret knowledge, a glimpse into the world beneath the waves where old powers still reside, yet it demands a terrible price, one that few can truly bear. I cannot remain here forever, balancing at the edge of this haunted coast. The more time passes, the heavier the lantern's weight grows in my mind. I fear a day will come when I climb the rocks once more, compelled to return it, to set it upon that pedestal in the sunken caverns, so that the tortured souls find the release they seek. Or perhaps the tower calls me for another reason, to replace those who have been lost, becoming a sentinel for its immortal beacon of dread. On nights when the clouds vanish and the moon bathes the beach in silver, I believe I hear the swirl of the sea whisper my name, and though my rational mind resists, an elemental pull awakens in my bones. Even now, as I finish my account, the pines sway in the gale, revealing glimpses of the lighthouse's silhouette. A pale glow appears at its apex, faint but unmistakable, as though the ancient lamp hungers to shine once more. My fingers trembled, making writing difficult. The truth is inescapable. Some things are not meant for human understanding, but to remain ignorant is to remain vulnerable to the hush of the waves, the hush that beckons each curious soul, one by one, into darkness. And in that darkness the tower stands, cold, unmovable. Its black stones thrumming with an otherworldly resonance that is both siren call and final tomb for those who heed it. I cannot quiet the suspicion that I am only biding time. Like those footprints in the sand near the entrance, my path is already drawn. The deeper knowledge in me regrets ever laying eyes on that solitary lighthouse. But I am caught in its thrall, as surely as the tide that can never flee the pull of the moon, or the souls below, woven into the tapestry of that eternal gloom, whispering into the wind, summoning the unwary to join them in gloaming. You, Atsid, despite my terror, or perhaps because of it, I feel myself inexorably drawn once again to that rocky promontory, and I know that one day I will succumb to the otherworldly radiance in the tower, my heartbeat aligning with that pulsating glow, trapped forever beneath the hush of the waves, rent by voices that wander, longing to be free. No.